Hey guys, this is another video for dudes and dummies out there who are looking to get into baking but don't know the basics. So what we're going to do now is do the crumb coating on a cake. This is the first step to doing sort of the frosting part of it, the decorative part of it. And it is an essential part because what you're doing here is creating a layer between the actual sponge of the cake and then the final frosting coat so that you don't get crumbs that mix up the final decor, and it creates a much cleaner look at the end of the cake. So the first thing that I highly recommend is if you're going to be doing this, make your cake ahead of time and freeze it. Number one, we've noticed that it creates a much moister cake for some reason. I don't know why it works, but it does. But two, it's going to give you a harder surface to work on that is a lot easier to frost. Okay, so you're going to want to have a turntable with a non-stick surface and then put your cake board right on there so that it doesn't move around while you're frosting it. Put a little dollop of frosting right there in the middle. That's going to hold your first layer of the cake to the cake board. And we're going to put that down on there and just give it a little press. Make sure you're centered on the board because you're going to be using this during the caking process. So, I'm going to bring this a little closer to my belly so I can hold it still. You're going to be doing your first layer of filling just by creating a little spiral from the center here. Don't worry if it's not perfect. This isn't going to be seen by anybody but you and God. And that's a good layer there. Go ahead and set your frosting to the side. Now you're going to take your offset spatula and literally just use it to move the frosting around. You're not putting any pressure on it at all, but you're just using to move it around and even that out on the top here between the layer. And bring it sort of all the way to the edge. Again, if it's not perfect, don't worry about it. What we're just looking to do is get as even a coat between the layers as possible. And then you're gonna wanna get down here to make sure that you've done this evenly and not created sort of a dome. That looks pretty good. By the way, funfetti is the best cake flavor and you can't convince me otherwise. You're gonna take your second layer, put it right on top and make sure you're looking at it from the top so that you've got it even with the others. And we're just going to repeat that process. That out. Okay. Now this is a little tricky, especially if you're doing it by yourself the first time. So you're going to want to get a really good grip here. Get your thumb and forefinger right in this sort of like little pit area here of your hand so that you're grabbing the bulk of the frosting tip, or the bulk of the frosting bag. Then you're going to use the turntable and pressure from your hand to get a coat of frosting on the edge of the cake. And just spiral it all the way down. Yeah, so if you were to look at this, without knowing the steps that are going to come next, I'm sure your first thought would be, please do not let this man near a cake. He clearly doesn't know what he's doing. He might be right, but we're going to do this anyways. Okay, that looks pretty good. Good enough for government work here. So now again, what we're going to do with our offset spatula is we are just going to even it out and cover up all of the cake layers. Again, you're not applying really any pressure. All we're doing is just moving it along to cover up the actual cake as best we can. Smoothing it out somewhat, but again, don't worry about it. Okay, now this is the part that, if I'm being honest, still scares me. So we're going to be taking our metal scraper here, and what you're going to be doing is putting it against the cake and then flat against the cake board on the bottom so that you've got a good level 90-degree surface. And then you're going to be taking your hand and literally turning this into one big circle all the way around the cake and getting off all that extra frosting that's uneven. I definitely bottom loaded this cake quite a bit more than the top. It's all that frosting coming from the bottom. And we're gonna give it another pass here. Again, applying even pressure across the whole cake vertically. You can see it's starting to even out. You can flip the scraper over again and do it one more time here. Yeah, all right. Let's get all this frosting off the scraper. So real quick example here, I have an uneven area here where it's like physically in from the rest of the cake, and that's just because the top of the cake is domed or rounded. And so what I'm gonna do here is add a bit of frosting to that area to just kind of bring it flat. To do another pass, got a couple little areas that I'll patch up here. And again, this is, if you're learning, this is the lower stress part of the cake, because everything you're doing here is ultimately going to get covered up either by you as you get more competent, or, as is often the case, by me, a more competent baker altogether, and my wife. And then also something you're noting here is you'll see some air holes in the side of the cake here in the frosting, and it's actually for the most part did better than my first passes usually go. But I'm going to patch these up, and then I'm going to run this bench scraper under some warm water just to warm it up a little bit, and we've found that that does a really good job of smoothing things out. All right, so I've warmed up my scraper, and we're going to give this another pass here. One more, and again, just keep it nice and vertical. Use our offset to scrape off the extra here. That's looking pretty good for a crumb coat. Might be one or two more just to satisfy my OCD. I think that's pretty good for me. Then the final little bit here is for this crowning area of frosting here. You're going to take your offset spatula and just use it to bring it in, and you're going to scrape off every time you make a pass. All right, it's looking all right. And I'm going to, just to make things pretty for myself, give this one last go around here, smooth out the top. Now, typically with the edges, this is something I've always been insecure about, but you know, it's not perfect as I'm looking at this at all. But very oftentimes, especially if you're doing a beginning cake, you're gonna have some sort of decorative frosting element on the top around the edges that'll help kind of cover up any imperfections here, and it does a really good job at that. So don't worry about it too much. The thing that matters most is that you're making your cake with love. Love is the greatest flavor of all.
And funfetti.
So for my purposes here as a dummy dude baker, I'm gonna call this good. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna pop this back into the fridge so that it has a chance to harden before we do our final frosting.